Power rarely announces itself with banners or drums. It moves in silence, clothed not in truth but in perception. The ruler who believes that command rests in armies or decrees alone mistakes the surface for the substance. Authority is not what one declares, but what others believe, and belief is shaped less by fact than by fear, desire, and appearances carefully arranged. Every state, every institution, every leader balances on this invisible currency, the perception of strength, the concealment of weakness, the calculated display of virtue when vice is the instrument behind the curtain. Men hunger for certainty, yet they live under illusions. To govern them is to feed these illusions with precision, not to tell them what is, but to show them what they cannot resist believing. Secrets are not merely hidden truths, they are reservoirs of leverage. What is concealed becomes a weapon, for in politics, ignorance is not absence but dependency. He who knows what others do not controls the pace of events. To keep a secret is to hold a blade in the dark. To reveal it at the right moment is to decide who bleeds. Thus, the wise leader does not rush to speak, nor does he hoard without purpose. He calculates the moment when silence gives way to revelation, when knowledge becomes command. Loyalty itself is built upon perception and secrecy. Rarely does it flow from pure devotion. It is sustained by fear of exclusion, by hope of reward, by the unspoken awareness that betrayal will cost more than obedience. The ruler who imagines loyalty eternal will be devoured by those who measure opportunity more keenly than fidelity. Therefore, loyalty must be managed, never assumed. It must be reinforced with rewards visible enough to inspire, punishments decisive enough to warn, and secrets deep enough to bind men in complicity. Ambition, too, feeds upon the unseen. Every man carries within him a theater of envy, hope, and calculation. To rule is to stage this theater, to decide which roles men may play, which desires may be fed, which ambitions must be broken. Appearances alone cannot hold them. Fear alone cannot silence them. Reward alone cannot buy them. It is the weaving together of all three that creates an enduring fabric of control. And when the threads fray, it is secrecy that repairs them. The art of power is not the elimination of enemies, but the shaping of their perception. Let them believe they are free when they are bound by invisible chains. Let them think they choose when every choice was prepared for them. The wise ruler does not crush every opposition. He permits some shadows to remain, so that men exhaust themselves chasing phantoms while he directs the stage. To lead is not to dwell in ideals, but to master necessity. Virtue, if it serves survival, is useful. If it threatens stability, it is discarded. Vice, if it secures the state, becomes an instrument no less legitimate. For men remember appearances more than deeds, words more than truths, outcomes more than intentions. What matters is not purity, but durability. A kingdom is not preserved by sermons, but by strategy. The hidden currency of power is not written in law or inscribed in marble. It flows in silence, in rumor, in the careful concealment of weakness and the ruthless exploitation of secrets. It is paid not once but endlessly. For the ruler who ceases to pay becomes a ruler in name only. Power is a debt that must be serviced daily with perception, with control, with leverage. And so, the one who would endure must learn to walk through the theater of human nature with steady eyes. He must know that men will betray, that allies will turn, that loyalty will decay, that appearances will deceive. But he must also know that all of these can be turned to advantage. For the raw material of politics is not virtue or truth, but the ceaseless interplay of fear, desire, and illusion. To master that interplay is to command not only the state, but the instincts that keep it alive. That is the hidden currency. That is the weight of command. That is the remorseless truth of power. The ruler who fails to understand the fragility of appearances becomes a prisoner of them. Power is rarely lost in a single decisive blow. It erodes through whispers, suspicions, and the small cracks that grow unseen until collapse is inevitable. To guard against this, one must not only build strength, but also construct the illusion of unbreakability. Men will test the walls of authority, but they retreat when they find them immovable. Once they sense weakness, however, every hand grows bolder, every voice grows louder, and authority dissolves into fragments. Deception is not an act of dishonor, but a necessity of governance. Truth, in its raw form, is often a weapon that wounds the hand that wields it. Men do not seek truth. They seek reassurance, confirmation, and stories that align with their desires. To lead them, one must craft these stories with precision, weaving truth and illusion into a fabric that holds their belief. This is not corruption but strategy, for the state itself is an edifice of stories, upheld by shared fictions that prevent chaos. Fear is the companion of power, not its enemy. A ruler need not be loved if he can ensure he is feared, but he must avoid being hated, for hatred corrodes the very ground beneath him. Fear binds men more tightly than affection, yet it must be administered with calculation, never excess. To govern through terror alone is to light a fire that eventually consumes its master, but to govern without fear is to invite defiance. The balance is delicate. A ruler must be both distant enough to inspire awe and near enough to inspire restraint. Betrayal is not an anomaly, but an inevitability. Every throne is surrounded by courtiers who calculate advantage. Every alliance is signed with ink that fades over time. Every vow of loyalty is weighed against future opportunity. To be surprised by betrayal is to confess ignorance of human nature. The wise ruler expects betrayal as surely as he expects the rising Sunday. He prepares for it, anticipates it, and uses it to purge weakness from his circle. For betrayal, when harnessed, can serve as a demonstration of justice, a spectacle to remind others of the price of disloyalty. Ambition is the fire that both builds and destroys. A ruler must harness the ambition of others as an engine for his state, yet he must guard against its sparks igniting rebellion. To extinguish ambition entirely is to stifle the energy that sustains greatness. To let it burn unchecked is to invite ruin. The art lies in channeling it toward tasks that strengthen the ruler's power, while ensuring that no single flame grows so large it consumes the master. This is why rulers reward service with measured generosity, allowing ambition to be satisfied without ever being fulfilled. Control is not exercised through force alone, but through the careful management of appearances. Men are less troubled by chains they cannot see. They will fight openly against oppression, but willingly accept invisible restraints if those restraints flatter their sense of freedom. The ruler who understands this does not rely solely on armies or decrees, but on the subtle architecture of influence, symbols, rituals, narratives, and institutions that mold behavior without open compulsion. In this way, he governs not bodies alone, but minds, and what is accepted in the mind rarely requires force against the body. The stage of politics demands performance. Every ruler must act, not in the theater of entertainment, but in the theater of survival. He must know when to wear the mask of compassion, when to display severity, when to remain silent, and when to speak. The mask itself becomes a weapon, for appearances once established are rarely questioned. Men will forgive a ruler's cruelty if it is cloaked in necessity, but they will not forgive weakness when it stands naked before them. The ruler who refuses to perform loses the stage, and with it, the state. Fate governs much, but not all. Fortune, like a tempest, may destroy the most carefully laid plans, yet it favors those who build with foresight. The ruler cannot command the winds, but he can build the harbor, strengthen the walls, and prepare the fleet. To complain of fortune is to admit unpreparedness. To harness it is to demonstrate mastery, and yet even fortune respects audacity, for boldness bends chance in its favor. The timid ruler is abandoned by fortune, while the daring one often finds it an ally. Thus, power is not a possession but a tension. It is held only so long as it is exercised with vigilance, calculation, and adaptability. To imagine it secure is to invite its loss. To think it eternal is to hasten its decay. The ruler who endures does so not because he has conquered once, but because he conquers daily in perception, in secrecy, in loyalty, in fear, in ambition, and in the ceaseless maintenance of appearances. Power is never owned. It is rented from the shifting instincts of men, and payment is demanded without end. No ruler governs in isolation, for even absolute authority is circumscribed by the eyes that watch and the tongues that whisper. The court is both an instrument and a danger, a theater of ambition where every gesture is interpreted, every silence measured, every word stored as a potential weapon. To master this environment, the ruler must appear open while concealing his true mind, for transparency is vulnerability. He must listen more than he speaks, reward more than he promises, and punish without delay when the moment demands it. For in politics, hesitation is interpreted as weakness, and weakness is a debt that others are eager to collect. The enemy is not always outside the gates. He often resides within. Ministers, advisors, allies, even family, each carries the potential for treachery cloaked in loyalty. The ruler who clings to sentiment in these matters risks ruin, for affection blinds judgment. To preserve the state, the ruler must learn to see men as they are, not as he wishes them to be. Gratitude fade, promise dissolve, but self-interest endure. Thus, he must always ask, what does this man desire? What does he fear? What secret binds him? And what ambition might one day turn against me? To ignore these questions is to gamble the throne on the fickleness of human loyalty. Violence, when it becomes necessary, must be decisive, swift and final. Lingering cruelty breeds hatred, and incomplete measures invite retaliation. Mercy, when displayed, must be calculated, for unmeasured clemency undermines authority as surely as unchecked brutality. Both the sword and the olive branch are tools, and their value lies not in moral virtue but in their capacity to preserve order. The ruler who understands this wields both with precision, never confusing pity with strength nor cruelty with dominance, but balancing them as instruments of survival. The people themselves are both the foundation and the threat to the ruler's stability. They do not crave freedom as much as they crave security. They do not seek truth as much as they seek relief from uncertainty. To give them the illusion of safety is to bind them more tightly than chains. Bread and spectacle, ritual and symbol, myth and promise, all are instruments to pacify their restlessness. They must believe they are part of something greater, even if their participation is carefully choreographed. If their hunger is satisfied and their fears managed, they will accept burdens that, under other conditions, they would revolt against. Enemies outside the state must be treated with the same clarity as rivals within. Alliances are convenient masks for mutual suspicion. Treaties are pauses between wars, and diplomacy is the art of concealing iron beneath velvet. To trust another state is to gamble on weakness. To distrust all is to paralyze oneself. Thus, the ruler must constantly weigh balance, offer friendship when it delays war, strike when hesitation will cost more than blood, and withdraw when battle promises only exhaustion. Victory belongs not to the strongest at one moment, but to the most persistent across many. History does not honor rulers for their intentions, but for their endurance. The annals of power are written not with ink, but with blood, with ruins, with victories preserved in stone, and failures buried in silence. The ruler who dreams of being remembered for virtue alone will be forgotten. The one who ensures his survival will shape the memory of generations. For history is not truth, it is power transcribed, and he who controls the present dictates the past. Above all, the ruler must never mistake possession of power for mastery of it. Thrones are fragile seats, crowns are burdens that corrode the brow, and authority is a current that must be guided lest it sweep its possessor away. To govern is to dwell in vigilance, to calculate with patience, to strike with resolve, and to conceal with art. To fail in any one of these is to watch the edifice collapse, and when it collapses, it falls not slowly but all at once, with the suddenness of a structure whose foundations were long eroded, yet unseen. Thus, power is not a monument but a dance upon the edge of necessity. It requires an unblinking eye, a steady hand, and a will unclouded by illusions of virtue or permanence. Those who endure are those who understand that leadership is not freedom but bondage to necessity, that command is not privilege but weight, and that survival is the only measure by which the game of power is ultimately judged. The language of power is silence as much as speech, shadow as much as light. To reveal everything is to surrender control, for what is known can be challenged, but what is suspected multiplies in the minds of others and binds them more effectively. The ruler who governs perception wields more force than one who governs armies alone, for fear of the unknown paralyzes more deeply than fear of the visible. This is why secrets are not merely hidden things, but engines of influence, reservoirs of leverage that sustain command long after weapons have lost their edge. Trust is a word used by the weak to console themselves, for in the arena of power it is not trust but calculation that endures. Alliances are signed with smiles, yet secured with fear, and friendships between rulers are merely pauses in competition. The wise sovereign accepts this without bitterness, for bitterness blinds, but clarity sharpens. He prepares for betrayal not because it is certain at every moment, but because it is certain across time, and he understands that to be betrayed is not always to be destroyed if the betrayal itself can be turned into spectacle, into warning, into reinforcement of authority. In the theater of statecraft, appearances are more lasting than truths. Men remember not the reality of a ruler's actions, but the image those actions projected. A defeat can be turned into glory if it appears as sacrifice. A cruelty can be disguised as justice if it is cloaked in ritual. A lie can live as truth if it is repeated with authority. The ruler, then, must be less concerned with what he is than with what he seems, for perception is the battlefield where power is either preserved or lost. Yet he must never fully believe his own illusions, for that is the most fatal delusion of all. Force has its place, but naked force alone is brittle. The army may secure the gates, but it cannot silence the whispers in the market, nor can it erase the doubts in the minds of those who serve within the court. Coercion breeds resistance, but persuasion disguised as inevitability breeds obedience. When men believe that events unfold according to necessity rather than tyranny, they submit more willingly, for they see no alternative. The genius of governance is not in showing men that they are bound, but in persuading them that they are free, even as they move within invisible chains. Fortune remains a force beyond calculation, a tide that lifts or drowns without warning. Yet fortune bends to the bold more than to the timid, for audacity seizes opportunities that hesitation lets slip away. A ruler cannot command storms, but he can set his sails to harness the wind when it rises. He cannot predict every upheaval, but he can build structures flexible enough to withstand them. Those who survive fortune's blows are not those who resist it rigidly, but those who bend without breaking, who adapt without losing command of the helm. Men speak often of virtue, but virtue is only valuable when it strengthens the state. When it weakens authority, it becomes vice in disguise. The ruler must measure every act, not by moral ideals, but by its consequence for stability, survival, and dominion. Mercy that endangers the throne is folly. Cruelty that secures order is necessity. Honesty that breeds weakness is recklessness. Deception that prevents chaos is prudence. Morality is the language of philosophers, but necessity is the grammar of rulers. To confuse the two is to walk blindfolded in a battlefield. And yet, with every calculation, with every mask, with every maneuver, the ruler pays a price. Power isolates, for trust is impossible and friendship suspect. Every hand extended may hide a dagger, every smile may conceal envy, every oath may prepare betrayal. The ruler must accept this solitude as the cost of command. To yearn for intimacy is to invite manipulation. To demand loyalty without leverage is to invite disappointment. The throne is not a seat of comfort, but a fortress of vigilance. And he who sits upon it must learn to live among shadows without ever forgetting they are shadows. Thus, the hidden currency of power circulates endlessly. Perception sculpted into reality, secrets hoarded and deployed, loyalties managed by fear and reward, appearances guarded more fiercely than truths, necessity elevated above virtue. To misunderstand this is to rule briefly. To master it is to endure. And endurance, not goodness, not justice, not glory, is the true measure by which rulers are judged when the chronicles of power are written in the cold ink of history. The ruler who endures understands that every decision carves a shadow longer than the act itself. A concession today plants doubt in the minds of tomorrow. A hesitation today emboldens the hesitation of tomorrow. A display of weakness becomes a signal for vultures to descend. Every gesture is studied, every silence interpreted, every absence of force mistaken for decline. Thus he must treat even the smallest decision as theater, for the audience of power never sleeps, and once convinced of weakness they will not return to reverence without blood as proof of renewed strength. Exile teaches more about power than possession ever can. Stripped of armies, deprived of court, abandoned by allies, one sees the raw essence of human nature. Men turn from the fallen not because they loved poorly, but because they calculate well. In the absence of utility, loyalty evaporates, and the hand that once clasped yours in oath now signs your condemnation without pause. From this one learns the cold truth. To preserve command, one must ensure that the price of abandoning you always outweighs the price of serving you. Gratitude fades, but fear and interest endure. Control is not only the management of others, but mastery over one's own impulses. Anger without calculation is ruin. Mercy without measure is danger. Desire without discipline is exposure. The ruler is most vulnerable not when betrayed by others, but when betrayed by himself. The moment he confuses impulse with strategy, he surrenders the advantage to those who wait in silence for him to falter. Self-command is therefore the first fortress of power, for without it, no army, no treasury, no intrigue can prevent collapse. Symbols sustain power as much as laws. Crowns, flags, ceremonies, rituals, these are not ornaments but armaments, weapons that wage war on the imagination of men. They instill continuity, they project inevitability, they convince the many that authority is eternal even when it trembles. A ruler who neglects symbols weakens his hold, for men obey less out of reason than out of habit and belief. To shatter their illusions of permanence is to awaken their hunger for change, and change is the enemy of stability. War remains the ultimate arbiter of rule. A state that cannot defend itself invites conquest. A ruler who cannot command in battle invites overthrow. Yet war is not only the clash of armies, it is also the subtle conflict of influence, the struggle for alliances, the silent siege of narratives. To prepare for war is to prepare for all forms of conflict, visible and invisible alike. Peace is not the natural state of nations, but a pause between hostilities, and the ruler who forgets this will be caught unready when the pause ends. The masses crave certainty but live in contradiction. They demand justice yet prefer security. They praise freedom yet fear responsibility. They worship strength yet despise cruelty. They obey authority yet whisper against it. To govern them is to navigate these contradictions, to satisfy one demand while concealing the denial of another, to balance their instincts so that their discontent never unites into rebellion. To imagine that one can satisfy them fully is delusion. To ensure they remain divided in their grievances is strategy. Every ruler, no matter how strong, carries within his realm seeds of his downfall. It may be the ambition of generals, the greed of ministers, the envy of heirs, the restlessness of the people, or the designs of foreign rivals. These seeds cannot be eliminated, only managed. To rule is not to eradicate danger, but to live among it, to prune one threat so another does not grow, to strike one enemy so others pause, to balance rivalries so none become overwhelming. Eternal vigilance is the price of survival, and survival is the first and last law of politics. Thus, the architecture of power reveals itself not as a monument of stone, but as a shifting balance of fear, desire, secrecy, and spectacle. It is not held by those who dream of virtue, nor by those who indulge in cruelty without calculation, but by those who see men as they are and shape them as necessity demands. To lead is to bear the burden of this clarity, to live without illusions, to govern without comfort, to endure without respite. And in the end, endurance is the closest thing to immortality that politics allows. Power bends men into shapes they do not recognize, yet it also unmasks what they always were. When the weight of command presses upon the shoulders, ambition, fear, envy, and desire reveal themselves in their purest forms. The courtier who flatters most eagerly is often the first to betray. The ally who swears eternal devotion is already calculating his escape. The minister who serves with efficiency may one day believe himself more indispensable than the sovereign. The ruler cannot be surprised by these transformations. He must expect them, exploit them, and direct them so that each man's ambition strengthens the throne rather than undermines it. The enemy who approaches openly across the field of battle is less dangerous than the one who smiles within the court. For open war can be met with armies and strategies, but the poison of intrigue works silently, corroding the foundation of trust until collapse appears sudden, though it was long prepared. This is why rulers must master not only the arts of the soldier, but the subtler weapons of the conspirator. Surveillance, deception, and calculated suspicion are not signs of paranoia, but instruments of preservation. To neglect them is to leave one's crown unguarded against invisible hands. Every generation believes itself different, yet the patterns of power remain unchanged. Technology alters the speed of communication. Commerce shifts the scale of wealth. Ideologies change the language of loyalty, but the instincts of man endure. He fears loss more than he desires gain. He clings to illusions more than he pursues truth. He follows strength more readily than he respects virtue. To rule in any age is to exploit these constants. To ignore them in pursuit of novelty is to dress old delusions in new garments and call them progress. The ruler's image must always exceed his reality. He may be uncertain within, but he must appear resolute without. He may face limits in resources, but he must project abundance. He may be constrained by circumstances, but he must act as if he commands them. Men rally not to truth, but to confidence, and confidence, once displayed, creates its own momentum. Doubt, on the other hand, spreads like disease, infecting the court, the army, the people, until what might have been endured becomes unbearable simply because belief collapsed before reality did. Fear and hope must be distributed with equal calculation. Too much fear breeds hatred and despair. Too much hope breeds expectation and restlessness. The ruler must give just enough fear to ensure obedience and just enough hope to prevent rebellion. This balance cannot be fixed. It must be adjusted continually, like the tension of a bowstring, for circumstances shift and the instincts of men shift with them. The ruler who misjudges the balance either snaps the bow with cruelty or leaves it slack with indulgence. Only the one who feels its tension daily preserves his power. Time itself is a weapon in politics. What cannot be defeated in the moment may be worn down through delay. What cannot be resisted immediately may be overcome through endurance. The impatient ruler acts before conditions are ripe, and in doing so wastes strength. The patient ruler allows enemies to expose themselves, allies to reveal their limits, fortune to shift the battlefield. Yet patience must not become paralysis, for opportunity is perishable. Wisdom lies in knowing when to wait and when to strike, when to conceal and when to reveal, when to promise and when to deliver. Thus, leadership is neither freedom nor comfort, but a ceaseless reckoning with necessity. To rule is to accept solitude, to embrace calculation, to speak with masks, to strike with precision, to endure without rest. The throne is not a gift but a trial, not a reward but a sentence, not an honor but a burden. Yet for those who bear it with clarity, it grants the only immortality available to mortals, the endurance of their name, not in the purity of virtue, but in the memory of survival, conquest, and command. For history does not ask whether a ruler was good, only whether he endured long enough to be remembered. The essence of command lies in the ruler's ability to see the world as it is, not as he wishes it to be. Illusions comfort the governed, but they destroy the governor. To mistake sentiment for strategy, to confuse popularity with strength, To believe that goodwill can substitute for vigilance is to prepare one's own downfall. Men admire ideals in speech, but in practice they follow power, and power belongs to those who do not flinch before the ugliness of necessity. The sovereign who dares to strip away delusion becomes the master of those who cannot live without it. The weight of secrecy grows heavier the longer it is carried, but it is also what sustains authority. Knowledge withheld is power preserved, for men act blindly when they cannot see the whole. To share too much is to surrender the advantage of foresight. To trust too openly is to place one's life in the hands of another's ambition. The ruler must decide each day what to conceal, what to reveal, and what to distort. This triad is the architecture of survival, for truth alone is rarely the safest weapon. Loyalty cannot be purchased once and kept forever. It must be renewed continuously, like a fire that dies without fuel. Fear, reward, and shared guilt bind men to the throne more effectively than promises of eternal devotion. The ruler who allows loyalty to rest on sentiment alone will find it vanish at the first sign of weakness. But the ruler who ties loyalty to necessity, who ensures that betrayal costs more than fidelity, secures obedience even from those who resent him. Affection is fleeting, interest is enduring, and fear, when measured, is the most reliable chain. Rivalry is the pulse of politics. No court is free of intrigue, no state without factions, no ruler without enemies. To eliminate all rivals is impossible. To tolerate them without balance is ruinous. The art lies in setting ambition against ambition, envy against envy, allowing rivals to contain one another while the sovereign remains the arbiter above them. A divided court is safer than a united conspiracy. The ruler who mismanages rivalries creates unity against himself. The one who orchestrates them ensures that others exhaust their energies in battles that never reach the throne. In times of peace, the ruler must prepare for war, for peace is never permanent but merely the pause between storms. In times of war, he must already think of peace, for war without calculation devours the state it was meant to protect. Strength lies not in endless conquest, but in knowing when to stop, when to consolidate, when to turn victories into stability. Many rulers have gained empires through war only to lose them through mismanagement of peace. Victory is incomplete unless it builds a foundation that endures beyond the battlefield. The people are the most dangerous ally a ruler possesses. They can raise him to the heights of power or drag him into the depths of ruin. They are fickle, swayed by appearances, inflamed by rumor, driven by hunger and fear more than by reason. To rule them is not to silence their voice, but to channel it, to direct their passions toward enemies outside rather than grievances inside, to give them symbols to worship and enemies to blame. When the people are distracted with spectacle and sustained with provision, they believe themselves free while serving the designs of another. Fate remains the silent partner of every ruler. No calculation can prevent its sudden turns. No vigilance can anticipate its every movement. Yet the ruler who prepares for misfortune, who builds strength when fortune smiles, who tests loyalty before it is required, is the one who bends fate to his survival. For fortune favors not the hopeful but the prepared, not the virtuous but the vigilant, not the timid but the bold. It punishes hesitation more severely than error, and it rewards those who dare while others wait for certainty. Thus, the hidden currency of power flows endlessly through perception, secrecy, and leverage. It is not held in treasuries or guarded by soldiers, but lives in the minds and fears of men. To command is to understand that survival outweighs morality, that endurance outlives virtue, that necessity eclipses intention. The sovereign who lives by these truths may never know peace of spirit, but he will know the only peace that matters in politics, the preservation of rule against the endless tide of betrayal, ambition, and time. The ruler who clings to certainty in a world of shifting sands condemns himself to collapse. For the essence of politics is change, and survival belongs to those who bend without breaking. What appears permanent today will be forgotten tomorrow. What seems loyal now may turn hostile in an instant. What looks like weakness can become strength if properly disguised. To endure, one must cultivate an instinct sharper than reason, an ability to read the tremors beneath the surface and act before they erupt. The wise ruler moves not when compelled by events, but before events demand it, shaping the current instead of drowning in it. Ambition is a force that cannot be eradicated, only redirected. Men will always seek more than they possess, and to deny them entirely is to drive their hunger underground where it festers into rebellion. Better to grant them the illusion of advancement, the appearance of reward, while keeping true power beyond their grasp. Give them honors that satisfy their vanity but not their authority, titles that flatter but do not threaten, wealth that dazzles but keeps them dependent. Thus, their ambition becomes a tool rather than a danger, their energy spent in pursuit of shadows rather than crowns. The mask of virtue must be worn even when vice is the instrument. Men prefer rulers who appear just, merciful, and honorable, though they rarely live by these qualities themselves. To appear cruel without necessity is to invite hatred, but to appear virtuous while acting with ruthless precision is to command respect. Hypocrisy is not a flaw in politics, it is a shield. Appearances feed belief, and belief sustains obedience. A ruler who discards the mask entirely invites resistance, while the one who wears it skillfully binds men with their own illusions. Fear remains more reliable than love, yet it must never descend into despair. When men fear without hope, they conspire in desperation. When they both fear and hope, they submit in silence. The ruler must therefore grant just enough light to prevent rebellion, just enough possibility to keep men bound to his fate. This balance is fragile, but it is the difference between a throne that endures and one that crumbles. Time devours all rulers, yet not all rulers are devoured equally. Some vanish in disgrace, remembered only for failure. Others endure in legend, their names echoing long after their bones have turned to dust. The difference is not virtue but endurance, not morality but mastery of necessity. Those who adapt, who bend, who strike with precision and conceal with art, live beyond their years in the memory of nations. Those who cling to ideals, who confuse hope for strategy, are forgotten with the same swiftness that they were overthrown. The throne is not a place of rest, but a battlefield without end. Every alliance is temporary, every peace fragile, every loyalty conditional, every triumph only the prelude to new dangers. To rule is to walk upon a knife's edge, where one misstep brings ruin and only vigilance preserves balance. Yet it is also to wield the most intoxicating force men have ever known, the ability to shape destinies, to command fates, to bend the wills of thousands with a gesture. This power is not a gift but a burden, not a blessing but a test, and only those who accept its remorseless weight without illusion survive its demands. Thus, the hidden currency of power circulates not in treasuries but in perception, not in armies but in belief, not in gold but in secrets. It is minted in fear, exchanged in loyalty, hoarded in silence, and spent in decisive acts that preserve authority. He who masters this currency does not merely rule, he endures. And endurance is the true victory in the theater of power. For all else, virtue, justice, compassion, even glory are but passing illusions in the cold ledger of survival. To govern is to accept that men are drawn more to appearances than to substance, more to promises than to results, more to symbols than to structures. They will endure hardship if it is framed as sacrifice. They will obey decrees if they are clothed in ritual. They will accept burdens if convinced they are temporary, though they rarely are. The ruler must therefore master the art of narrative, for politics is less the shaping of laws than the shaping of perception. A well-forged story pacifies unrest more effectively than a battalion, for it enters the mind where no sword can reach. Suspicion is the constant companion of the throne. To dismiss it is folly. To indulge it without restraint is madness. The ruler must learn to listen to whispers without being consumed by them, to see potential conspiracies without imagining them everywhere, to act when suspicion ripens into certainty, but never to strike blindly. To live without suspicion is to invite betrayal, yet to govern only by suspicion is to isolate oneself until even allies become adversaries. The art lies in vigilance without paranoia, in watchfulness without paralysis. The machinery of the state must function as both shield and weapon. Institutions are not monuments of justice, but instruments of control, and their true purpose lies not in fairness, but in stability. Courts, councils, assemblies, armies, all must be designed to project order, to contain unrest, to channel ambition, and to protect the sovereign's authority. If they fail in this, they cease to serve the state and become tools for rivals. A ruler must therefore shape institutions as he would shape men, rewarding loyalty, punishing treachery, cloaking necessity in the garments of legitimacy. There is no permanence in alliances, for every bond between rulers is born of necessity and dies with its cause. States befriend not out of love, but out of fear, not out of admiration, but out of calculation. To forget this is to be deceived. To remember, it is to be prepared. Treaties are written on parchment, but enforced only by strength. The ruler must therefore carry both the ink of diplomacy and the iron of war, knowing when to use one and when to threaten with the other. For words without weapons are whispers, and weapons without words are wasted blood. The people demand leaders who appear to share their suffering, yet they despise those who are truly no different from themselves. They want rulers above them, but not beyond them, close enough to inspire hope, yet distant enough to inspire awe. The sovereign must walk this line carefully, displaying humanity without surrendering authority, humility without sacrificing dignity, accessibility without erasing distance. To become too familiar is to lose reverence. To become too distant is to invite alienation. Balance is survival. Fortune favors those who understand its dual nature. It is both chance and choice, both storm and sail. No man can control its arrival, but every ruler can prepare for its test. Those who act boldly seize its gifts. Those who hesitate are swept away. Yet boldness without preparation is recklessness, and preparation without boldness is wasted labor. The sovereign who survives fortune is the one who builds strength in calm waters and dares to command in rough seas, who treats both gain and loss as temporary, and who never confuses fortune's favor with permanence. The end of every ruler comes, but how it comes is determined by the choices he makes when he holds power. Some die forgotten, their reigns dissolving into obscurity. Others fall violently, remembered only for their downfall. A few endure beyond death, their names etched into the fabric of history, not because they were virtuous, but because they were ruthless enough to survive and cunning enough to shape memory. For history does not record what men were, it records what they appeared to be and what consequences they left behind. Thus, the hidden currency of power remains the same across ages: perception, secrets, and leverage. It is an endless exchange, a cycle that binds ruler and ruled, ally and enemy, friend and traitor. To hold it is to walk alone, to live without certainty, to govern without peace. Yet it is also to command the fate of nations, to bend human nature into order, to carve one's name into the stone of time. And for those who accept its burden, nothing greater can be imagined. The ruler must always remember that the throne is not a sanctuary, but a target. Every eye fixed upon it admires and envies, reveres and resents, seeks its protection yet conspires for its possession. Authority is not an inheritance of peace, but an inheritance of struggle. To sit upon the seat of command is to inherit the enemies of one's predecessors, the ambitions of one's allies, the discontent of the governed, and the envy of the forgotten. To imagine otherwise is to mistake the weight of the crown for its ornament, when in truth it is a burden that presses down without rest. Deception is not merely the act of lying, but the architecture of survival. Men crave certainty, and when certainty is impossible, they will accept illusions. The sovereign who provides these illusions commands their obedience more effectively than the one who offers brutal truth. Truth without calculation breeds revolt, but illusion well managed creates harmony. Yet the ruler himself must never be deceived by the illusions he creates. The mask is for others, never for the one who wears it. For the ruler who begins to believe his own performance is already walking toward ruin. Every weakness concealed is strength preserved. The state is not destroyed by its flaws, but by their exposure. Rivals survive on the perception that the sovereign can falter. The people rebel when convinced their master is vulnerable. Allies withdraw when they sense instability. The ruler must therefore bury his vulnerabilities beneath layers of appearances, projecting certainty even in moments of doubt, decisiveness even in moments of hesitation, control even in moments of chaos. To falter privately is human, but to falter publicly is fatal. Violence, though feared, is a medicine when administered with precision. Disorder spreads like infection, and hesitation to cut away the diseased part threatens the entire body. Mercy shown too early strengthens rebellion. Severity applied too late multiplies its cost. But when violence is swift, targeted, and undeniable, it not only destroys the enemy but also instructs the living. One act of decisive cruelty prevents countless acts of lingering unrest. Thus, cruelty, when governed by necessity, becomes a form of prudence, and mercy, when governed by weakness, becomes a form of folly. Men respect strength even when they resent it, and they despise weakness even when they benefit from it. A ruler may be hated and still endure if he is strong. He may be loved and still fall if he is weak. Love is a gift freely given, but easily withdrawn, while strength is an anchor that men cling to even against their will. Therefore, the ruler must never sacrifice strength in pursuit of affection, for affection without fear breeds contempt, and contempt breeds rebellion. The ruler must also understand that time itself conspires against him. Every reign begins with novelty, with hope, with expectation, but as years pass, the memory of victories fades, the weight of burdens grows, and the appetite for change stirs. What was once admired becomes taken for granted. What was once tolerated becomes unbearable. Thus, he must continually renew his image, refresh his authority, reinvent his presence. Stagnation is the slow death of rulers. Reinvention is the preservation of their command. Isolation is the inevitable condition of power. No confidant can be trusted fully, no friend free of self-interest, no ally without hidden designs. The ruler stands alone even in the midst of crowds, for his position demands solitude. To resist this solitude is to weaken oneself with longing. To embrace it is to fortify oneself with clarity. Solitude teaches vigilance, suspicion, and restraint, the very qualities that preserve authority when all else falters. So the hidden currency of power continues to circulate, unseen but omnipresent. It is not weighed in gold or measured in armies, but in the fears and hopes of men. It binds ruler and ruled, ally and enemy, strength and illusion, into a single relentless system. To command within this system is not to rest, but to struggle, not to enjoy peace, but to impose order, not to find comfort, but to endure necessity. And in that endurance lies the only true legacy of power, survival in a world that seeks without pause to see the sovereign fall. Power ends not with applause, but with silence. The ruler who has endured the storms, who has balanced fear and hope, who has concealed weakness and revealed only strength, understands that survival itself is the greatest triumph. Virtue fades in memory, victories are rewritten by time, monuments crumble under new empires, but the fact of endurance resists erasure. To remain standing when others have fallen, to preserve order when chaos waits at the gates, to command until the last breath without surrendering the stage, that is the true measure of rule. The final secret is this: no man owns power, he only borrows it from the illusions of men and the necessities of the age. When he departs, willingly or by force, the cycle begins anew, for ambition never dies and loyalty never outlives its cause. Yet the sovereign who mastered perception, who governed with calculation, who walked alone but unflinching through betrayal, conspiracy, and fortune, leaves behind more than a throne. He leaves the shape of the state itself, molded by his will into something that endures after him. Thus, the hidden currency of power reveals its final truth. It is not wealth, nor armies, nor virtue that defines the ruler, but the ability to endure necessity without illusion, to wield both mask and sword without hesitation, to shape human nature rather than be broken by it. To rule is to accept solitude, to embrace calculation, to command without rest. And though every reign must end, the sovereign who lived by necessity does not vanish entirely. He becomes part of the architecture of power itself, a lesson etched into the memory of states, a shadow cast across the future. In the end, this is the ruler's only immortality. Not to be loved, not even to be admired, but to be remembered as one who endured, who understood, who commanded. All else is noise. All else is illusion. All else is dust.